Hi guys, I'm Tequila Mockingbird, and finally I'm saying welcome back to The Path of Flame by Yoda Palmer. I was wanting to find a better way to record this before actually putting out the episode, then I realised just how long it had been, since the last episode. So I'm just going to keep going with what I've got for now, and I'll keep an eye open for something to make it a better quality in the meantime. But for now, just enjoy the chapter, Chapter 9, Wild Thing. As the school year started coming to an end, Harry found himself alone in the library with Hermione more and more often. Draco had never gone with him as much to begin with, but Neville just didn't seem to have either the interest or the patience to put in the long hours of studying that Harry had become accustomed to. Harry couldn't blame him, though. If he wasn't so concerned about what his dad would think of his grades, he'd probably be studying a lot less too. Hermione, of course, was thrilled to have someone to study with at all hours of the day, even if Harry was a little less than enthusiastic about the work. It was when he was walking back to his dormitory after one of his study sessions with Hermione that he heard Professor Quirrell being threatened, or rather, he heard Professor Quirrell's response to being threatened. No matter how hard Harry listened, he could not hear the second voice. The professor was clearly intimidated, though, and finally agreed to whatever demands the other person was making of him. Harry waited until he heard Professor Quirrell run out of the room before he peeked through the open door himself, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever had been there with him. But the room was empty. A door at the far side stood ajar, and Harry briefly considered crossing over to investigate further, before realising that whoever had been threatening enough to scare away the Defence Against the Dark Arts teacher would surely be too much for an 11-year-old to handle. Instead, he turned away and all but ran back to the Gryffindor's tower, hoping to catch Hermione before she climbed into her common room. The Gryffindors would probably be more interested in what he overheard than Draco would, and besides, he could tell Draco any time he wanted. To his surprise, he found both Hermione and Neville outside the common room, facing off against Ron Weasley and Seamus Finnegan, all of them clearly upset about something. Harry slowed down uncertainly, not wanting to interrupt house business, but it didn't take him long to realise that the two unfriendly Gryffindors were getting on Hermione's case about studying with Harry all the time. It seemed they were upset that the studious girl was helping Harry get good grades, when apparently she couldn't even be bothered to help any of her housemates, who probably needed it more anyway. Harry wasn't surprised that the two boys were conveniently ignoring the fact that most of the house didn't exactly treat Hermione respectably. What did surprise him, though, was that the person most ferociously arguing with Ron and Seamus was Neville, not Hermione herself. Hermione, of course, didn't really need anyone to protect her, but it warmed Harry's heart to see Neville being so assertive for a change. The good feeling didn't last long. As Harry approached, Ron's temper seemed to get the better of him, and he started flinging spells at Neville. Most of them either didn't hit or weren't a successful cast, but Harry didn't really like the odds when Seamus, who was known for setting things on fire by accident, started backing Ron up. He was grateful, not for the first time, for his dad and Ed's assistance on teaching him how to defend himself, because his own spellcasting was effortless, and he knocked back the two Gryffindor boys with insulting ease. "What is going on here?" Professor McGonagall's voice came as Ron was painfully picking himself back up off the floor, and all five of them froze as the woman stormed down the hallway towards them. "You know fighting is forbidden. Explain yourselves." The five of them gave each other uncertain looks, but nobody actually said anything. The professor's nostrils flared as she stared angrily down at them all, before finally she seemed to lose her patience entirely. "Well, if nobody's going to defend themselves, that's 10 points off of each of you. Yes, each of you. Silence, Finnegan. And detention apiece. Potter, don't you have your own common room to be in?" "Yes, Professor," Harry replied, unable to keep the dissatisfaction from his voice, and obediently turned to return to the Slytherin dormitories. He'd have to talk to Hermione and Neville later. "What do you have detention for?" Draco asked the next morning, peering nosily over Harry's shoulder as he opened the mail at the table. "I got into a fight with some Gryffindors." Harry sighed back. "Weasley and Finnegan attacked Hermione and Neville, and, well, what was I supposed to do?" "So now you've got detention with the 4 of them?" Draco asked, shaking his head. "Sounds like you're in for a night of fun." "Thanks," Harry said sourly, resolving to put it all out of his mind until the end of the day. But at 11 o'clock that night, he was down at the entrance hall, unable to ignore his upcoming detention any longer. The Gryffindors were standing in 2 awkward groups, at either side of Filch, glaring at each other. Neville was the only one who looked round as Harry approached, and gave Harry a small, nervous smile in greeting. Filch berated them as they trooped across the grounds, and Harry found himself becoming increasingly nervous at the undisguised delight in the caretaker's voice. What were they being sent to do exactly? Harry assumed they'd be writing lines or an essay on why fighting was an appropriate way to handle disputes, like any sensible school and mistress would be doing. But they couldn't do that outside. Even though he'd become good friends with Hagrid, Harry couldn't help his nerves from getting worse when his hut came into view. Hermione and Neville didn't seem to share his concern, though. They brightened visibly at the thought of the man, prompting Filch to scowl and nastily inform them just of where their detention was taking them. The forest!" Ron repeated nervously, and for once Harry found himself in complete agreement. He'd heard about the things that lived in the forest, and he wasn't keen on interacting with any of them. But what about the creatures that live in there? I heard there's werewolves." "Should have thought of that before you broke the rules, shouldn't you?" Filch chortled gleefully. "About time," Hagrid said, striding towards them with a crossbow in his hands and Fang at his heels. "I've been waiting for half an hour already. Right, Harry, Hermione, Neville?" "I shouldn't be too friendly with them, Hagrid," Filch said coldly. "They're here to be punished, after all." "That's why you're late, is it?" Hagrid frowned back. "Been lecturing 'em, eh? It's not your place to do that. You done your bit. I'll take over from here." "I'll be back at dawn," Filch said nastily. "For what's left of them." He turned and strolled back to the castle, and Harry wasn't sorry to see him go. "Are we really going into the forest?" Ron asked, turning to Hagrid with wide eyes. When Hagrid frowned at him and nodded, he visibly straightened his back, though the distraught expression failed to fade from his face. "Now listen carefully, 'cause it's dangerous what we're going to be doing tonight, and I don't want to be taking no risks. So follow me over here a moment." He led them to the forest's edge. Holding his lamp up high, he pointed down a narrow track that disappeared into the blackness of the trees. "Look there. See that shining stuff on the ground? Silvery stuff? That's unicorn blood. There's a unicorn been hurt badly by someone. This is the 2nd time in a week. We're going to try and find the poor thing. We might have to put it out of its misery." "And what are we supposed to do if whatever hurt the unicorn finds us first?" asked Seamus nervously. "I don't think a bunch of students should be going up against something that can catch unicorns." There's nothing that lives in this forest that'll hurt you if you've got me or Fang with you," Hagrid replied, though he seemed pleased by Seamus's caution. And keep to the path. Right now, we're going to split into 2 parties and follow the trail in different directions. There's blood all over the place. Must have been staggering around since last night for a while." "I want Fang," Seamus said, his eyes focused on the dog's long teeth. "All right, but I warn you, he's a coward," said Hagrid, making Seamus flinch. "So me, Hermione and Neville will go one way, and Harry, Seamus and Ron and Fang will go the other. Now, if any of us find the unicorn, we'll send up green sparks, right? Get your ones out and practice. That's it. And if anyone gets into trouble, red sparks. And we'll come and find you, so be careful. Let's go." The forest was black and much quieter than Harry expected it to be. When they reached a fork in the path, Hagrid sent Harry and his company down the right path, while he took Neville and Hermione down the left. Harry and the two Gryffindors walked in silence for a long time, their eyes on the ground so that they could follow the sporadic trail of blood on the fallen leaves. They'd been walking for the better part of an hour when Harry finally saw the clearing ahead of them, and he stopped Seamus and Ron with his arms. "Look," he said simply, nodding at the bright white spot on the ground ahead of them. As they inched closer, the form became clearer, until Harry knew for certain that it was the unicorn. It was clearly dead, its legs splayed out in all at odd angles, where it had fallen to the ground. A terrible sadness tugged at Harry's heart as they gazed on it, and he found himself rubbing absent-mindedly at the corner of one eye. "We need to send up Sparks," Ron eventually suggested in a hushed whisper. But before Harry could get out his wand, a terrible slithering noise froze him in place. A moment later, a figure came crawling out like a great stalking beast. All four of them stood, frozen, transfixed by the sight before them, until the cloaked figure finally reached the unicorn and began to drink its blood. Ron and Seamus both let out terrible screams, and Fang and Seamus bolted. Harry didn't know whether Ron stayed out of bravery or fear, but as the figure got to its feet and moved towards them, he soon realised it didn't matter. A pain like he'd never felt before pierced his head. It felt as if the scar was on fire. Half blinded, he staggered backwards into Ron, who grabbed his elbow and started stumbling backwards himself. There was the sound of hooves behind them, then something jumped clean over them, charging at the figure. It took a moment for the pain in his head to pass, and when he finally looked up, the figure had gone, and a pale-haired centaur was standing in front of them. Ron was still clinging awkwardly to his elbow, half holding him up, but Harry was too distracted by the beast in front of him to remember to thank him. "Are you all right?" the centaur asked. "Yes, thank you. What was that?" If the centaur had an answer to the question, he didn't provide it. His startlingly blue eyes were focused on Harry's scar instead, and he frowned thoughtfully at them. "You are the Potter boy," he said. "You had better get back to Hagrid. This forest is not safe at this time, especially for you. Can you ride? It'll be much easier this way." "My name is Firenze," he added as he lowered himself onto his front legs. Harry clambered awkwardly onto his back, and Ron hesitated a moment before following him up. More galloping announced the arrival of two more centaurs, one red-haired and bearded, the other black-haired and wild-looking. "Firenze!" the black-haired one thundered. "What are you doing? You have a human on your back. Have you no shame? Are you a common mule?" "Do you realise who this is?" Firenze asked. "This is the Potter boy. The quicker he leaves this forest, the better." "What have you been telling him?" growled the other centaur. "Remember, Firenze, we are sworn not to set ourselves against the heavens. Have we not read what is to come in the movement of the planets?" The red-haired centaur pawed nervously at the ground and said in a gloomy voice, "I'm sure Firenze thought he was acting for the best." "For the best? What is that to do with us? Centaurs are concerned with what has been foretold. It's none of our business to run around like donkeys after stray humans in our forest." Firenze suddenly reared up on his hind legs in anger, and Harry felt Ron grab him around the waist in panic, as he himself desperately gripped the centaur's shoulders so he wouldn't fall off. "Do you not see the unicorn?" Firenze bellowed. "Do you not understand why it was killed? Or have the planets not let you on to that little secret? I set myself against what is lurking in this forest bane. Yes, with the humans alongside me, if I must." Without another word, Firenze whisked around and plunged back into the dark forest. "Why is that guy so angry?" Harry asked. What was that thing you saved us from?" Ferenz slowed to a walk, but didn't answer Harry's question. He remained silent for so long that Harry had figured Ferenz didn't want to talk about them any longer, and he settled gloomily into a more comfortable position. The silence stretched on for another long moment, until Ferenz suddenly stopped as they were passing through a particularly dense patch of trees. "Do you know what unicorn blood is used for?" the centaur asked suddenly. "No," Harry said, startled, and turned to face Ron, who stared back blankly at him. Clearly he didn't know either. "We've only been using the horn and tail here in potions." "That's because it is a monstrous thing to slay a unicorn. Only one who has nothing to lose and everything to gain would commit such a crime. The blood of a unicorn will keep you alive, even if you are an inch from death. But it is at a terrible price. You have slain something pure and defenseless to save yourself, and you will have but a half-life, a cursed life, from the moment the blood touches your lips." Harry stared at the back of Ferenz's head in disbelief, while Ron gawked behind him. "But who would be that desperate?" Harry wondered aloud. "If you're going to be cursed forever, death's better, isn't it?" "It is," Ferenz agreed. "Unless all you need is to stay alive long enough to drink something else. Something that'll bring you back to full strength and power. Something that'll mean you can never die. Mr. Potter, do you know what is hidden in the school at this very moment?" "No," Harry said in puzzlement, but he couldn't help himself from feeling excited. Was he finally going to find out what Fluffy was guarding? "Your headmaster has sought to keep a certain object created by his alchemy partner, Nicholas Flamel," Ferenz said, and Harry gawked at him in surprise. The headmaster knew alchemy? It wasn't that widely practiced outside of Amestris or Shing, and for various reasons, and he hadn't expected Dumbledore to practice the art. "Can you think of nobody who would desire what the Philosopher's Stone would have to offer, then?" You mean," Ron stated in surprise, as Harry felt a cold dread settle itself in the pit of his stomach. "That was you-know-who?" "Harry!" Hermione's voice called out before Ferenz could answer. She was running towards them down the path, Hagrid and Neville huffing noisily along behind her. "Harry, are you all right?" "We're fine," Harry said, ignoring Ron's disgusted snort. "The unicorn's dead, Hagrid. It's in the clearing back there." "This is where I leave you," Ferenz murmured as Hagrid hurried off to examine the unicorn. "You are safe now." Harry and Ron slid awkwardly off of his back. "Good luck, Harry Potter," Ferenz said. "The planets have been read wrongly before now, even by centaurs. I hope this is one of those times." Harry felt himself shivering as the centaur bound back into the forest, but it wasn't from the cold. When Harry got back to the dormitories, he silently shook Draco awake and dragged him, grumbling, down into the common room. He was silent as Harry told him about the events in the forest, staring wide-eyed and fearful at Harry as he paced. "He must have help inside," Draco said, tapping soundlessly at his own knee. "Everyone says Dumbledore's the only person that the Dark Lord was afraid of, and if he's as weak as Ferenz is suggesting, then he'll need somebody to get him inside." "But who can it be?" Harry asked desperately. "All of the teachers are loyal to Dumbledore, aren't they? Even Snape." "Don't look at me like that, Draco. You know he hates me. Even he has to respect the headmaster, right? But if we don't figure it out, Voldemort could get the stone at any minute. I should owl Dad." "No!" Draco said, so quickly that Harry stopped in his tracks. Draco blushed lightly, but continued in a calmer voice. "The centaurs could be wrong. Ferenz said so himself, didn't he? And what if your dad took you out of Hogwarts for your own safety? You know who never showed up. Don't you want to stay here?" Harry bit his lip uncertainly, but Draco did have a point. Roy would take him out of Hogwarts in a heartbeat if he thought his son was in any real danger. And Harry didn't really want to go back to school in Amestris when he was just settling into England. And what if Firenze was wrong? This was all just a conjecture, really. They had no proof. And it could be any number of people wanting something as impossible as immortality. "Okay," he said heavily, sinking into the chair beside Draco and staring into the dying fire. "I won't tell him." But even as he said this, he couldn't help but feel it was a mistake. Thankfully, as the days went by and Fluffy remained growling behind the locked door to the third-floor corridor, Harry found himself thinking it increasingly unlikely that Voldemort was going to show up after all. There was an unusually sharp pain in his head, right behind his scar, which had started bothering him after the night in the forest and hadn't stopped since. But Harry reluctantly chalked it up to a headache brought on by studying for the exams. Finally, the exams were over, and Harry found himself lounging on the grounds with the other Slytherins in his ear. It was too hot to do anything, and so instead they watched from a safe distance as the Weasley twins and Lee Jordan tickled the giant squid's tentacles. "Maybe you should go to Madame Pomfrey," Pansy suggested eventually, as Harry rubbed uncomfortably at his prickling scar for the 100th time that week. "I'm not ill," Harry said crossly, as he'd done every other time someone had suggested something similar. "I just wish I knew what was causing it." "Relax, Harry. The stone is as safe as it's ever going to get," Draco drawled lazily, though his concerned gaze never left his friend's face. "I don't imagine much of anyone is going to get past Fluffy without Hagrid telling them how to. And he seems stupidly loyal to Dumbledore, doesn't he?" That was true enough, Harry supposed. Hagrid was a good man, and he wouldn't sell out to someone like Voldemort easily. Of course, every person had a weakness. Take Draco and Harry's strange obsession with dragons, for instance. Harry suddenly found himself jumping to his feet, almost before he realised he was doing it. But only Draco seemed interested in what he was up to. "We've got to go see Hagrid," Harry announced urgently, making Blaze and Pansy grimace in distaste. Draco frowned as well, but got to his feet, dusted off his clothes, and hurried after Harry, who had already turned and started running across the grounds. "Don't you think it's a little odd that what Hagrid wanted more than anything was a dragon, and a stranger suddenly turns up who happens to have a dragon egg in his pocket? How many people wander around with dragon eggs if it's against wizard law? Luckily they found Hagrid, don't you think? Why didn't I see it before?" "You think Hagrid did tell someone then?" Draco asked in horror, but Harry didn't respond. Hagrid was sitting in an armchair outside his house, shelling peas into a bowl as he chatted happily with Hermione and Neville. "Hello," he said with a smile, as Neville and Hermione waved at Harry. "Finished your exams too? Got time for a drink?" "No, we're in a hurry," Harry replied impatiently. "Hagrid, I've got to ask you something. You know that night you won Norbert? What did the stranger you were playing cards with look like?" "Dunno," Hagrid said nonchalantly. "He wouldn't take his cloak off." Harry and Draco shared a dismayed look, and Hagrid raised an eyebrow at them. "It's not that unusual. You get a lot of funny folks in the Hog's Head. That's the pub down in the village. Might have been a dragon dealer. Mightn't he? I never saw his face, and he kept his hood up." Harry sank dismally down to next to the bowl of peas, hoping he was wrong. "What did you talk to him about? Did you mention Hogwarts at all?" "Might have come up," Hagrid said, frowning in concentration. "Yeah, he asked what I did, and I told him I was a gamekeeper here. He asked a bit about the sort of creatures I look after, so I told him, and I said what I always wanted was a dragon.
I can't remember too well, 'cause he kept buying me drinks. Then he said he had an egg and we could play cards for it if I wanted. But he wanted to make sure I could handle it. So I told him, after Fluffy, a dragon would be easy.
And did he seem interested in Fluffy? Harry asked calmly, as now Hermione and Neville stared at Hagrid in horror.
Well, yeah. Just how many three-headed dogs have you met? Even around at Hogwarts. So I told him, Fluffy's a piece of cake if you know him well enough, if you just know how to calm him down. Just play him a bit of music and he'll go straight off to sleep.
Hagrid suddenly looked horrified. But Harry wasn't paying attention. He and Draco had already taken off back to the castle, with Hermione and Neville joining them. None of them spoke until they finally found themselves at the dim entrance hall. "We've got to go to Dumbledore," Harry said. "Hagrid has told a stranger how to get past Fluffy, and it must be whoever's helping Voldemort under that cloak. I hope the headmaster believes us. Maybe friends will back us up if Bane doesn't stop him. Where's Dumbledore's office?" They look around desperately, as if they thought Dumbledore's office would just appear before them when they needed it. They'd never been sent to the headmaster, and none of them knew anybody who had. Except maybe the Weasley twins. But they'd be too interested in why they wanted to go to see Dumbledore than be any use. "What are you four doing inside?" McGonagall's voice rang across the halls. They all spun around to see her approaching them with a large stack of books. "We want to see Professor Dumbledore," Hermione piped up into the nervous silence that ensued. "See Professor Dumbledore?" McGonagall repeated suspiciously. "Why?" "It's sort of a secret," Harry said nervously, and immediately wished he'd thought of something better as their professor's nostrils flared in anger. "Professor Dumbledore left 10 minutes ago," she said coldly. He received an urgent owl from the Ministry of Magic. He flew off to London at once. "He's gone?" Harry asked in horror. "Professor Dumbledore is a very great wizard, Potter, and he has many demands on his time." "But this is important," Harry protested desperately. "Something you have to say is more important than the Ministry of Magic, Potter?" "Well, normally, no, but it's about the Philosopher's Stone," Harry blurted incautiously. Professor McGonagall clearly hadn't been expecting that answer. The books she was carrying tumbled out of her arms as she stared at them in astonishment. "How do you know about—" she spluttered. "Professor, somebody's going to try and steal the stone. I've got to talk to the headmaster." "Professor Dumbledore will not be back until tomorrow," McGonagall said eventually, in a very final tone. "I don't know how you found out about the stone, but rest assured, no one can possibly steal it. It's too well protected." "But Professor Potter—" "You know I know what I'm talking about," she said shortly, her patience clearly having run thin, as she bent down and gathered her books. "I suggest you all go back outside and enjoy the sunshine." Reluctantly, and very slowly, they trickled out of the front doors. "It's tonight," Harry said decisively, once their Transfigurations professor was definitely out of earshot. "Whoever's helping Voldemort must have sent that note. I bet the Ministry will get a real shock when Dumbledore turns up." "But what can we do?" Hermione asked. "It's obvious, isn't it?" Draco asked, pale face flushed in excitement and his eyes glittering. "If none of the teachers will do anything, we've got to keep the stone safe ourselves." "I'm going to try and get the stone first," Harry agreed. "I'm not letting Voldemort get that stone, and Dad's too far away to get here in time, even if I send Hedwig to him now. I've got the invisibility cloak. It shouldn't be too much of an issue getting down that corridor." "But will it cover all four of us?" Neville asked timidly. All four of us?" "Well, we're not letting you go alone," Hermione said briskly, and Harry was stunned to see Draco nodding in agreement with her. "I can go look through my books, see if there could be something useful." "You don't have to come," Harry said blankly, looking at the others around him.
It'll be dangerous, and if we don't make it in time, it won't be much better if the Dark Lord does come back, Draco said gloomily. And this isn't too much for one 11-year-old to handle. You're going to need all the help you can get. We're coming. And that was that. And that was Chapter 9 of The Path of Flame by Yoda Palmer. I want to thank anybody who is still following along with this series, because it has been a long time since I posted an update, but I am going to try and get back into a rhythm. I know I said that last time, but this time I've actually set myself up a schedule to be able to do that properly. So, yeah. Link to the original written fic will be in the description below, and I have been Tequila Mockingbird, and I will see you in Chapter 10.